Moving on from the heroic Stormcast, the next spearhead we are going to be taking a look at is the massively more boisterous and honestly ridiculously fun looking spearhead for the Orruk Warclans, which is the Ironjawz Bigmob. Now this is one of the newer spearheads, and if you love just getting stuck into combat and bringing all sorts of carnage to the enemy in your games, then I do think this one does honestly look like it's going to be right up your alley. The Bigmob is made up of a Megaboss who is the General, and he has 2 units of Ardboys, 5 Brutes, and then 3 Brute Ragers coming alongside him. So it's quite a lot of bodies actually, and more importantly, quite a lot of wounds to throw down on the table. There isn't a huge amount of finesse in this one, it is just a big slab of orky muscle ready to charge up the board, get into combat, and tear up the battlefield. It does follow in some ways to the one we saw the other day of Yndrasta's Spearhead, in that not all of your units start on the board. Your 5 Brutes don't get deployed as usual. Like Yndrasta, they come on in the 3rd battle round, and they get set up with the Here We Go rule, and that allows them to be set up anywhere on the battlefield more than 6 inches from enemies. So yes, you do get that slight delay in them having an impact in the game, although it isn't fully half your army like Yndrasta's is, so it is a bit less of a pain from that perspective, but being able to bring them onto the board 6 inches from enemies means they can get a really good, reliable charge into a target, and then just do a huge chunk of damage when they do reach combat. The second part of your battle trait is Mighty Destroyers. This is done once per turn in any hero phase, and it lets you pick a unit that wasn't set up this turn, and they can make a 3-inch move, and they can move into combat if you want to. So on those very small spearhead boards, that extra 3 inches of movement can be very, very significant, and it can quite easily let you sneak into a combat in your hero phase or even in the enemy's hero phase, or just get up the board a bit more to make it much easier for you to make a charge in a following charge phase. It is honestly a very, very strong trait, and like I said, for spearhead games, and especially with a spearhead that wants you to get up the board and into melee as soon as possible, it does bring some incredible value to one of your units each turn. I really like the fact that you can do this in any hero phase, so you can, as I said, move into combat in the enemy hero phase or fall back and make a potential charge a bit harder. It just allows you to be really aggressive, really cagey, really sneaky, and it is just a brilliant trait to have on this faction. Your choice of Regiment ability comes in the form of the passive Natural Disaster, which is really strong, but it is a bit unreliable. It gives a unit +1 attack on all their melee weapons if they roll an unmodified 8+ on their charge roll. So it's not going to go off all that often. It is under 50% of the time that you're going to roll an 8 on 2d6. But on the other hand, getting +1 attack on your melee weapons is a pretty big bonus for your units in this spearhead, and in the right situations, it really can let you do a huge amount of damage when you charge into a big enemy unit. My main problem with this one is that you just can't rely on it, so you can't bank on it. If you are charging into a unit that you know you are going to struggle to kill but can reliably kill with that +1 attack on your weapons, you're still going to be weighing up, is it worth that risk? Because sod's law is that you won't roll the 8, you won't be able to fully kill the unit, and they will fight back and kill off a load of your guys in return. So I do think it's a strong buff. You know, getting +1 attack on the charge is very, very good. It's definitely valid if you want to go for that slightly riskier option, but the alternative is a proper ruckus, and I would say this is generally a bit better all round. It does have a big caveat in itself in that it is only once per battle, but what a proper ruckus does is that it means that you can use your Mighty Destroyers ability, which gives you that 3-inch move, and you can once per game use it on all friendly units that weren't set up this turn, so your entire army potentially can get that bonus movement and potentially move into combat. You could in theory get your entire spearhead moving into combat without even charging. So this can just be great to get your army better positioning, or as I said, sneak into combat before the enemy gets to charge off. It is just a brilliant buff. And whilst it is only once per battle, in a small game like Spearhead, which is only 4 battle rounds, that one use could be all you need to win the game. So I think while both are good, I would say a proper ruckus for me just feels a bit more useful. Yes, it is limited, but it's something that you can plan around. You know when you're going to have it go off because you choose when it's going to go off. So it is just much more reliable and gives you this really good army-wide buff. Next up, in terms of what your general can get from the enhancements, they are all pretty decent actually, and being able to choose them after you know what you're going up against in terms of your opponent does help quite a lot with these. Amberbone Whetstone is fantastic against some armies. It buffs your general's boss chopper to 2 rend, which can make a huge impact against enemy 4 or 5 up saves. Although on the flip side, if you're going up against Nighthaunt, you will never ever pick this. But in most situations, I'd say in a good 90% of situations, getting some extra rend is an always welcome buff. Trophy Skulls grants him +5 to his control, making him a hefty 7 control all by himself, and able to really wrest objectives away from the enemy really quite easily in some situations. It's maybe not quite as flashy as some of the others, but if you are playing the objective game and want to win by just going after those objectives and taking them, this can make your general really good at charging into units all by himself, killing off a load of them, and then just really reliably taking that objective from them. If instead you want a bit more durability, the Armor of Gork grants him a 6-up ward save, which isn't much, but it can help. He does have 8 health on your Mega Boss and a 3-up save, so the 6-up ward will help him stick around just that tiny bit longer. It'll also give you some token protection if your opponent has a load of mortal damage in their abilities, so I'd say it's maybe not the best pick, but again, if you know what you're going up against and you know that they have a certain style of attacks or whatever, this could be worthwhile if you do want that mortal damage protection. The final enhancement is Mega Bossy. This is another passive one, and all 4 of these are actually passive, which I think is really great for this Spearhead. This one grants +1 to charge rolls for friendly units within 12 inches of him, wholly within 12 inches of him, I should say, after he's charged. So just bringing a bit more reliability to your other units after your Mega Boss has gone in. It's a pretty great buff, and to be honest, it's fairly easy to keep at least a few units within that wholly within 12-inch bubble even after he's charged. +1 to the roll isn't exactly the most amazing buff, but equally, it does have a big impact. It changes a 9-inch charge from a 27% chance of succeeding to a much more reliable 41%, and it definitely is worth thinking about, I think, if he's going to be going up the board with a few units near him, just to make sure they all get into combat at the same time when you need them to. All in all, I would say it's 4 very good, very simple, very straightforward enhancements. They've all got value, they're all very easy to slot onto your Mega Boss and use on him. There's no sneaky tricks or once per game abilities, it is just 4 flat, good, passive buffs. Now onto the Warscrolls themselves. The Mega Boss, as I said, is 8 health with that 3-up save. He does have a super good melee profile. He is absolutely terrifying in combat. 8 attacks, and yes, they only hit on 4s, but wounding on 2s with 1 rend and 2 damage means that if you take that Whetstone enhancement for 2 rend, he can by himself put over 5 damage into an enemy 4-up save, so he can quite easily take out smaller units solo, which is very good for helping him to just charge in and take objectives by himself. He is, like all the units in this Spearhead, very slow with only a 4-inch move, so you really do need to be taking advantage of their charging and the extra move from Mighty Destroyers, and of course the 6-inch deep strike rule in Here We Go for your brutes. Overall, the Spearhead can be tricky because it is possible to outmaneuver a lot of your stuff, but that once per game 3-inch move for all of your units can be absolutely clutch, effectively doubling your mobility army-wide for that one vital turn and really allowing you to hit combat when you need to just obliterate anything in your way. The Mega Boss also has his own rule of get stuck in lads, and this allows him to pick either himself or a friendly brutes unit wholly within 12 inches of him in your hero phase, and they get +1 attack on their melee weapons on a 2+, so he can bump himself up to 9 attacks or potentially even 10 if you chose the Natural Disaster Regiment ability. So he's really fighty, he's pretty tanky, you just need to plan around that slow 4-inch move. You also get 2 units of the Ardboys. These are 2 health each and a 3-up save, so they are pretty tanky, 10 health in total per unit. Again, they do have that slow 4-inch move, so you really do need to plan around that. In terms of their output, they get 2 attacks each in melee, which are 4s and 3s, 1 rend and 1 damage, but they do get +1 rend if they get charged. So these are your more defensive unit to screen and just keep back to keep your objectives safe. Their output isn't amazing on its own, but they do get a little bit of help with that with their special rule, which is called Shield Bash. And this allows them to add a little bit more chip damage. Essentially, you pick an enemy unit within 1 inch of them, and you roll a d6 for each model in your unit that is within 3 inches of that enemy unit. So you will likely get the full 5 in range most of the time, and then for every 6, you do a mortal damage to the enemy. So with only 5 models in the unit, it's likely only going to be doing 1 mortal damage most of the time. That's actually needing slightly above average rolling with only 5 dice, but you'll probably be doing 1 damage most of the time in each combat phase, so it's not going to do a huge amount, but that can still potentially help to deter a smaller unit from jumping into them, just in case they do lose a model or a unit that's on their last couple of wounds. They may not want to go into you just in case they die before any fighting actually starts. The Brute Rages are a slightly more heavy hitting unit. These guys are your damage dealers that get to start on the board. With 3 health each, although only a 5-up save, they aren't super tanky. They will go down quite fast against a focused enemy, but if they manage to get a charge off, they get strike first, which is brilliant on them, and then in combat, they are 3 attacks each, 4s and 2s, 1 rend and 2 damage. So the unit of 3 will be throwing out 9 attacks, and on average they'll do around 5 damage to a 4-up save, so they are really quite killy in Spearhead games. And just as an aside, because I know some people are going to question this, there's been a lot of talk about it on various forums, the Brute Rages, they can benefit from the Mega Boss's Get Stuck In Lads ability, I think, as that now clarifies it is Brute keyword units from the caps in the wording of it. The main army rule of your Brute unit not coming in till turn 3 doesn't have that. It just says your Brute's unit. So I think that just applies to the actual Brutes and not your Brute Rages, as that part of the rule, as I said, isn't in capitals. So I may be wrong, but as far as I understand it from the full interactions, these guys, your Brute Rages, they do start on the battlefield and they can benefit from the Mega Boss's buff. And then finally we get to the actual Brutes themselves. These are the guys that do start off the battlefield. They are a unit of 5 and they are just absolute tanks. 3 health each with a 3-up save, and then they have 3 attacks each, 4s and 3s, 1 rend and 2 damage. So they can survive a lot and they can hit back super hard. They also have a fantastic gameplay rule with their You Messin rule, which means that enemy units with the health characteristic of 1 or 2 can't contest objectives while they're in combat with your unit. Now, almost everything you will be going up against, except characters in Spearhead, is going to be 1 or 2 health. So stopping them completely from playing the objective game is incredibly strong, because it doesn't just reduce their control, it flat out stops them contesting. So these guys are a great unit for popping up, making a 6-inch charge, doing an enormous amount of damage with all their attacks, and then just totally shutting down an enemy from trying to hold or steal an objective that you want. They are just incredibly good, and I think even coming in battle round 3, so you don't get the full use of the game out of them, they can still make a massive difference. When they come in battle round 3, if they make that 6-inch charge, you are going to be having 15 attacks going into an opponent, each being 2 damage, so they really can wipe out a lot when they come and make their charge. Overall, I think this is just a fairly straightforward and very fun Spearhead. You've got your defensive units in the Ardboys, you've got your War Boss and the 2 Brute units, which are up there as your hammer to just move up the board, get into combat as soon as possible, and just smash your opponent into oblivion. It's super fun, and it can also be a little bit techie if you wanted to, with that Mighty Destroyers rule to give you a bit more mobility and just allow you to play the objective game very well. So I really like it. I haven't played against this Spearhead personally yet, but I do think when I do, it's going to be a lot of fun to go up against. I also think it's going to be a lot of fun to play with, as long as you are being mindful of your units and know that you may struggle with that slow 4-inch move, and you have got very little defense against any ranged attacks, so that is going to hurt you. But generally, you are tanky with a lot of health, you've got some pretty good saves across the board, and you can be deceptively speedy with a potential once per game 7-inch move on at least one, but maybe all of your units. But as always though, I'd love to know what you think of this Spearhead, and if you've played with it or played against it, how it performed on the battlefield. Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.